In a little while, you'll know for certain that I'm putting my very life on the line and the safety of my family by sharing this with you. So I hope that buys me at least a few minutes of your precious time.
We can easily forgive a child who's afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light. Plato. Plato's words resonated with me as I reflected on Altiyan Child's 5-hour video, where he accuses Freemasonry of being part of a global satanic conspiracy. When I started, I set out to counter all of his many errors and mistakes, but the sheer number made that task almost impossible. I found myself getting lost in repetition, growing more and more frustrated, and feeling disconnected from my Masonic principles of balance and harmony. Then I had a moment of clarity. After looking more closely at Mr. Child's troubled past, it became clear to me that this tirade wasn't really about Freemasonry. It was about his own internal struggles. What I was witnessing was not a man who truly believed Freemasonry as a satanic cult, but rather a man battling his own demons. So, I've chosen to change my approach. Rather than engaging in every single claim he makes, I think the most effective way to rebut Mr. Childs is to shine light on how he deliberately misrepresents the texts that he uses as evidence. By taking them out of context, he distorts their meaning to fit his viewpoint. This alone should show that he is not just wrong, but also disingenuous. But when he knowingly twists the words of the author and presents them as fact, it is easy to see that his views are not the truth. So in the spirit of the light that Plato spoke of, Freemasonry teaches us to seek the truth, and it is only through the truth that we can dispel the darkness of ignorance.
All the leaders from Africa to Europe to the Middle East, what if I told you that they all belong to the same religion, a secret religion? Let me tell you what this religion is. And how do I know about this religion? Because I used to belong to it. And today I'm renouncing it publicly, breaking my oath of silence, which they imposed upon me and every single other member during ceremonies under the penalty of death.
Mr. Child says he's breaking a silence imposed on him by Freemasonry. However, the truth is that no man can become a Freemason unless it be of his own free will and accord. No one is ever coerced or forced to become a Mason. All actual Masons know this simple truth. There is no penalty of death in Freemasonry. Any penalties mentioned within Masonry are purely symbolic, not literal. In fact, they are deliberately over the top and horrific. This is because they reflect a deep remorse and anguish that any honorable man would feel from breaking his word. This may seem out of place in our modern world of social media anonymity, where a man's word is not considered a virtue. However, these descriptions are over 300 years old, and to a Mason, our word is our bond and represents a moral accountability, not a physical penalty.
The religion is the connection, the secret religion, because in their beliefs, the uninitiated, meaning you, are ignorant and stupid compared to them. You're technically called the vulgar and the profane. Now, the secret identity of this one eye lies in the heart of this religion, and Freemasonry camouflages it very successfully until it ultimately fulfills a thing called the Great Work. That's what they call it.
We all recognize that words change meaning over time. The word vulgar, when written in a 19th century text, refers to the archaic meaning of the word, which was simply common people. Profane is also an archaic word. Look up the definition. Latin, pro, meaning before, and fanum, meaning temple, or Latin, profanus, or outside the temple. In Masonic terms, vulgar and profane are just people who are not Masons. What is this great work? I've never heard of it. Unless he's speaking of all the charities that Masons organize, like the Shriners' 22 hospitals worldwide that have treated 1.5 million children with cancer, absolutely for free. Is this the great work Altiyan speaks of?
Now here's one of the 3 greatest Freemasons of all time. Now Albert Pike writes in his colossal work, which some refer to as the Bible of Freemasonry, called Morals and Dogma, And on page 113 he says, "What can there be in common between the vile multitudes and the sublime wisdom?" Now look at what else Freemasonry thinks of the uninitiated, from the words of the Grand Commander himself. "The truth must be kept secret, and the masses need a teaching proportioned to their imperfect reason." I hope you're listening.
I hope you are listening, because Altiyan just lied to you. He said that this quote from Morals and Dogma shows us how Albert Pike has a disdain for non-Masons. Unfortunately, these are not the words of Albert Pike. If Altiyan had just read a few paragraphs before this quote, he would see that these are the words of Synesius, not Albert Pike. Albert Pike quotes Synesius, who was the man who actually said these words. Pike has no good words for Synesius. From Rex Hutchinson's book, Commentaries on Morals and Dogma, we can see that Synesius is mentioned 6 times in Morals and Dogma, and is described as such. Synesius, a pagan writer and philosopher who was elected as bishop in AD 410, before he was even a Christian. He was a student of the great Hypatia. Probably his only work of value today is his essay in praise of baldness. Certainly, Altiyan Childs is not being honest about the quote nor the history, and he's being deliberately deceitful.
These truths were covered from the common people as with a veil. There's that veil again. And the mysteries were carried into every country. Freemasonry was secretly imported from the East into the whole world.
Wrong again. Here, Albert Pike is talking about Lamaism, otherwise known as Tibetan Buddhism. Albert Pike is not talking about hiding Freemasonry from you. He's talking about Tibetan Buddhism.
The sages, meaning the enlightened ones, always had an esoteric creed, unknown to the vulgar. Are they right? Am I wasting my time?
I think you are wasting your time, Altiyan. I encourage the viewer to pause the video and read what is actually on the page. Altiyan is again using passages out of context. Albert Pike is explaining how ancient people saw the universe, believing that the stars, sun, and moon existed solely to serve Earth and mankind. They thought the Earth was the center of the universe and the only place with life. Albert Pike is not saying that modern Freemasons have secret knowledge unknown to others. He's simply pointing out that ancient cultures had different views.
And here he says, to the end that the vulgar herd, seeing, might not see anything, and hearing, might comprehend nothing.
Altiyan fails again, deliberately not reading the quote as written. When you actually read this page on the screen, you can see Pike is telling us the story of Pythagoras, who was initiated into secret sciences. The priests who held this knowledge hid it, using complex symbols to keep it from being easily understood. When Egypt was devastated in 528 BCE, priests fled to Greece, carrying their knowledge with them. Yet, they continued to teach in the same way, so that ordinary people, or the vulgar herd, wouldn't easily understand the meaning. Pike isn't using vulgar herd to insult non-Masons. He's explaining that ancient teachings were made difficult to understand. He points out that this old method of teaching is incorrect in a modern world.
Freemasonry is Satanism in disguise. He boldly states, Lucifer, the light bearer. Strange and mysterious name to give to the spirit of darkness. Lucifer, son of the morning. Is it he who bears the light? Doubt it not.
And here we are, at Altiyan's last quote from Morals and Dogma, and the famous one that everyone uses to claim Freemasonry is a satanic cult. Notice again how the entire passage is not read. So many critics equate Freemasonry with satanic worship based on Albert Pike's mention of Lucifer in Morals and Dogma, yet fail to understand the context. Pike uses Lucifer, meaning the light bearer, to highlight the struggle between knowledge and ignorance. He speaks against the misuse of the term, pointing out how enlightenment can be overwhelming and misunderstood by those unprepared for it. Rather than promoting Lucifer, Pike critiques the idea of blindly following a false light. Freemasonry focuses on personal growth, moral integrity, and the pursuit of truth, not darkness or evil. We finally now can leave behind Albert Pike, which was the only true Masonic source that Altiyan uses. The rest, besides Manly P. Hall, are all anti-Masonic writers from the 19th and early 20th century. We could very quickly wade through these other authors, but we must pause for Manly P. Hall.
This too is for the poor Freemasons that are going to have the call to make an appearance in the comments section trying to defend their beloved fraternity. This is 33rd degree Freemason Manly Hall, who was named Freemason of the Century by the Scottish Rite Journal in 1990. Well, the Freemason of the Century wrote in this book and in this chapter, Freemasonry is a fraternity within a fraternity, an outer organization, concealing an inner brotherhood of the elect. One visible and the other invisible. So once again, don't listen to the lost or deceptive Masons that'll come here trying to cheat you from the truth, telling you that I don't know what I'm talking about or calling me an anti-Mason. Well, what does the Freemason of the Century have to say about that? From this book, he writes, Masonry is essentially a religious order.
Hall was a highly prolific esoteric author who wrote over 50 books and gave over 8,000 lectures. He gave speeches at Carnegie Hall in front of thousands of people in the 1940s. There's no doubt that Hall was a Freemason and a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason, which is an honorary title granted to very few men indeed. However, what most people do not realize is that every important text that Hall wrote was written before he ever stepped foot in a Masonic lodge. The book Altiyan cites, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, was written in 1925. The Lost Keys of Freemasonry was written in 1922. And The Secret Destiny of America was written in 1944. Manly P. Hall did not become a Master Mason until November of 1954, and was not granted the title of 33rd degree Scottish Rite until December of 1973, almost 45 years after writing The Secret Teachings of All Ages. To use a man's words, who is not yet a Mason, as a source on Masonic scholarship is not credible. And sadly, in recent years, as our understanding of history, theology, and archaeology has advanced, Hall's work has not aged well. To quote Louis Sagan in his 2007 article, Masters of Mysteries, The Secret Life of Manly Palmer Hall, published in Volume 15 of Haredom, the official Scottish Rite Research Society journal, critics dismiss Hall's work as biased interpretations of old sacred texts and arcane philosophies by a man who played fast and loose with the facts, the validity of such fanciful notions as magic, spiritual manifestations, and mind reading, borrowing heavily, and rarely crediting his sources. They are right up to a point. Hall saw himself not as a scholar, but as a teacher, and he did not always practice what he preached. When I had the honor of speaking to the head librarian and other scholars at the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C., Hall was not a recommended source. He is thought of today more as an esoteric entertainer than a Masonic scholar.
Now this applies to all areas of industry. It's done through the ruining of your reputation by fellow Freemasons, pointing him out to the world as an unworthy vagabond, by opposing his interests, making life very hard for you, by deranging his business, by transferring his character wherever he may go, and by exposing him to the contempt of the whole fraternity, the secret society, and the world.
This quote is from Reverend C.G. Fenney's book, The Character, Claims, and Practical Workings of Freemasonry, written in 1869. Fenney was a staunch anti-Mason, and Mr. Childs using this text as a primary source is deceitful. Fenney's source for his text was Light on Masonry, which was the predominant anti-Masonic book of the time. What is quoted here is not part of Freemasonry today, and its credibility is questionable at best.
And here, from this old ritual book written by the same legendary author, in the 33rd degree initiation, the Mason drinks wine from a human skull. In the 30th degree, part of the ritual involves stabbing skulls. Illustrated right here.
I think this might be a good place to end this video, as Altiyan is now quoting a book by John Blanchard, the ex-president of Wheaton College and fervent anti-Mason. I covered John Blanchard's views in my previous video that I'm linking above. If you want to know more about how convoluted and strange all of the connections anti-Masons make, dating back well over 100 years, click above. If Altiyan Childs believes that the entire world is run by a decentralized fraternity of men raising money for charity, I think he needs help. I think his frustrations in life have led him to believe this insane theory. He must blame someone, and certainly does not have the courage to look in the mirror where the real problem lies. Mr. Childs never presented a single shred of proof that he was a Mason, never revealed anything that isn't already on the web, deliberately misquoted Albert Pike over and over again to prove his non-theory, and predictably relied on the same tired anti-Masonic texts as everyone who believes this ridiculous conspiracy that Freemasons are a satanic cult that rules the world behind the scenes. The world is far too complicated for such a simple answer to be the correct one. Please like and subscribe, and I hope you'll be back soon for another edition of Freemason Reacts.